Hey, I'm April, and this is Bitch Bed Podcast. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back or welcome to the podcast. Before we jump into this month's episode, I do just want to say a very huge and very belated thank you to every single person that has tuned into this podcast over the last 9 months. 10 months. It's technically been 10 months. Thank you. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Thank you for giving my perspective on things a chance. I know it's very late. I should have been doing this from the very beginning. However, I've always kind of struggled with gratitude. I kind of just distance myself from things and I just do what I got to do and then I move on to the next thing. And I've been talking to my husband about different milestones. This is all that this podcast has reached. And that's kind of just where it's been. But I definitely should have been thanking you guys because you're the ones helping me reach these milestones. It's not just me doing it. It's definitely you guys. They're doing as much work in this relationship as I am. So thank you. I am trying to get better with gratitude. It's been something that I've been trying to work on for quite some time. And it's just something about that mindset is just really having a hard time clicking for me. But I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still trying to get better at it. So again, I apologize for this taking so long, but I can't go back and change it. All I can really promise is that I'll do better from this point out. But thank you all so much for listening to me, and thank you for tuning in as often as you do. With this month's episode, I had a completely different idea planned out, and I was working on it, and last night I just decided that I needed to shift gears because this month was not a great month for me, and especially within the last week and a half, I've been struggling a bit. So I felt like it would be more real and authentic to come on here and talk about what I've been struggling with and why I've been struggling and how I've kind of got myself out of that struggle a bit, instead of just talking to you about all, the things I do when I'm in a great place instead of, and I think it's also important to talk about when I'm not in the best headspaces or in the best of places instead of just talking about all the good parts. So last week, I got fired from my job. And not only did I get fired from my job, but my husband also got fired from his job. We worked at the same company and we both got fired the exact same day. Yes, that does mean that me and my husband lived together and we also went to work together. So we were spending a solid 90-95% of our time together. A lot of people can't fathom that, and it worked for us. Luckily, I thoroughly enjoy my husband's company and he enjoys mine, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. We were also on 2 different teams, so we didn't really have to interact a lot of working at work too much. But we both got fired, and it's a bunch of bullshit in my opinion. We kind of figured that he was going to be getting fired just because shit was happening and someone that was jealous of the position he was in and they wanted his position even though they weren't doing any kind of work to work for that position. But whatever, they decided they were going to complain about something that my husband has absolutely no control over, and it ended up going up and up and up in the company, and eventually they decided that they were going to fire him. And we weren't expecting me to have the same fate. I'm sure some of that decision came from that company not wanting to deal with me after they'd fired my husband, because I'm definitely the one to worry about and the one not to piss off out of the two of us. So they decided to take the coward's way out and fire me as well for some bullshit reason. After I got home, I was like, yeah, I could have fought for, that job, because a lot of things started clicking into place after my first initial meeting with HR, but I decided I didn't have the energy to fight for a position with a company that I give less than an ounce of a fuck about. So I decided that that job wasn't for me anymore. And the day before we got fired, we had the super full moon in Pisces, as well as I think it was a lunar eclipse as well. So I did a bunch of saging. I saged the whole house. I saged me and my husband, and I simply asked the universe, I said, hey, remove anything that's no longer serving me. And the next day I got fired, so it delivered. So I wasn't too upset that I got fired. I was more upset about the reasons for why I got fired. And I was more upset that my husband got fired for something that he physically could not control. And the first couple days after we came home, I was definitely mad for obvious reasons, and I was a lot more pissed off than my husband was, and he was stressing and worrying and trying to figure out what we're gonna do for money, and this, that, and the other. And I was reassuring him, we're gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this. And then somehow along the way, me and him switched, and I started having to deal with anxiety seriously for the first time in my life. I've experienced small amounts of anxiety with very particular situations that I get placed in will trigger my anxiety to come out. But for the most part, I don't deal with anxiety, or I don't have to deal with anxiety. I've never been a stressor. I've never been a worrier. I've just kind of let things roll off my back. I've always had the kind of mindset of, if I can't physically change it, or I don't have control over it, why am I going to worry about it? It's outside of my control. So I'm not going to, stress about all the woulda, coulda, shouldas in life, or the what ifs, and, all these different possibilities that could potentially happen. It was just never something that I did. And I'm sure maybe later on in life, maybe if we decide to have kids, I'm sure that will change, because I'll have a human being to worry about. But as of right now, I've never had to deal with anxiety. So I went up to my husband and I was like, I don't understand why I'm having this pit feeling in the bottom of my stomach, and it just won't go away. And he was like, oh, that sounds like it's anxiety, and anxiety affects people in different ways. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't fun. Because on top of me having to deal with anxiety for the first time, I then also found myself walking and teetering the line of a depression spell for a few days. And it was such a weird sensation, or a feeling, because I could almost feel my depression coming up to grab me and try and grab the back of my shirt to tug me into the vast dark void that is my depression. And I was trying to fight it, and I was trying to not let it get to me, but it eventually did. And I found myself just being, consumed by my depression. And when I am depressed, I have a tendency to not talk to anybody. I don't respond to text messages. I don't interact with people in almost any capacity. I barely was talking to my husband. I very much just kind of seclude myself, and I just get very internal, and it's just, I internalize everything, and it's just, I turn inward and I just kind of start pushing everybody away. And I noticed myself doing that, and I noticed that this wasn't good. And if I let it keep going, it was only going to get worse. And a lot of that was, I'd never been fired before. And my husband had also never been fired before. So we were both having to navigate these uncharted waters for the first time in our lives. And I don't do well with uncharted waters. And I remember when I was talking to my dad recently, I was telling him about it. And he was like, "Yeah, you don't do well with the unknown." I said, "I really don't, because when I get surrounded by too many question marks and I don't have the answers for them, I get overwhelmed and I don't like it. Because I like knowing things. I like knowing how things operate. I like knowing what to expect with certain things. And right now, with unemployment being unemployment, it takes a sweet time to kick in, and a couple other things that are happening that are making this particular time period very stressful for me and my husband, because it'd be one thing if they just fired my husband, because then I would still be working and I would still have a paycheck coming in. But they couldn't do that. They had to fire both of us on the same day. So now we're both struggling about how we're going to pay these bills and how we're going to get money coming in and what we're going to do, and this, that, and the other. And we can't both be spiraling, because one person needs to be the rock for the other person. And if we're both spiraling, then it's just going to be a bad time for both of us, and it's not going to get anything done. So I am thankful that luckily me and my husband weren't spiraling at the same time, and we were both able to be that pillar of support for the other, and that rock, and that grounding. Because I remember we were going out to get breakfast one day because we needed to eat, and I was telling him, I said, there's a part of me that keeps mentioning that if I had just kept my mouth shut, that I'd still have a job. And he goes, "Well, that's not a fair thing to put on you." And I responded and I said, "Well, she's never been fair." And he goes, "Yeah, you're right, she hasn't been, but that doesn't make her right." And I think what a lot of it was it wasn't the fact that me and him got fired because we weren't doing our jobs, because we were still doing our jobs and we were still very good at our jobs. Could I have kept my mouth shut a little bit more? Yes, but that's just not who I am. And if I got fired because I stayed true to who I am, then I got fired for staying true to who I am. I'm definitely a person that if I see a shitty spade, I'm going to call it a shitty spade. And that's just how it is. If you tell me you're making a dumb decision, I'm going to tell you that it's a dumb decision. And if I say something behind your back, I'll say it in front of your face, because if I said it once, I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it. And if I decide to change my mind along the way, then I'll let you know. But I'm usually pretty consistent with what I say, because I'm a very firm believer in you say what you mean and you mean what you say. So I very much say things with my whole ass chest a solid 95% of the time. And if that's what got me fired, then that's what got me fired. But with my depression trying to claw me back into its dark depths, it was definitely hard to fight it off, because I could only do so much, and eventually it wins sometimes, and it definitely started winning. And I was telling a friend, as well as my dad, and my husband, that it felt like I just started getting pulled in two different directions with the anxiety and with the depression. Because if my depression started winning, then my anxiety decided it was going to kick it up a notch. And if my anxiety was winning, then my depression decided it was going to kick it up a notch. So it was just this pull between two different emotions that one I never experienced seriously, and the other one is just not fun to be around. If you've ever dealt with depression, you know it's not fun. And I was having these spirals where I was just feeling like a complete and utter failure because I got myself fired, obviously, and I never have done that before. I've left jobs and I've had times where I wasn't working, but it wasn't because of something that I did. So it, navigating that realization was hard. And then with the unemployment, me and my husband never filed unemployment before, so we were having to navigate that. And I felt like I had done that wrong, and then we were, in a position where we might not get that chunk of money from my side because I didn't do it right. And I just felt like no matter what I did, it was just going to fail, and I didn't want to just jump in. A lot of things were making it seem like I just needed to jump in to, whatever job would hire me. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to end up in the same position that I was just in, where I was at a dead end, nowhere company that doesn't pay their people well enough to, live. Because if they had paid us well enough, then maybe we would have a savings account that we could fall back on and not have to stress about how we're going to be paying rent in a couple of weeks and all the other bills that we have. And, we would be a lot better, well equipped to handle this transition between employments. But of course, that didn't happen. And I really wanted to be able to take time to figure out what I wanted my next step to be, because I didn't want to end up in a nowhere dead end job that just paid me enough that I was going to be able to pay my bills. I wanted to be able to find a position that was going to pay me well and also not be too insanely stressful, because I didn't want this podcast to fall to the wayside, because it's something that I actually enjoy, and it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that I look forward to doing every month. So, I didn't want to just jump into the next thing because it's, would pay the bills. So it was just a lot of different things coming up that just weren't aligning with what my head was telling me, what my depression was telling me, what my anxiety was telling me. And it eventually just started to crumble in my brain. So I felt myself starting to really seclude and really start to enter the vastness that is my depression. So I wanted to try and fight it as much as I could. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna run a bath. I'm going to relax. I'm going to put on some music that I like. I'm going to talk to a couple of friends and kind of let them know what I've been dealing with and kind of talk it out and see if I can start working through this. And then my husband came in, and because I was basically sitting in the dark. I mean, I had a candle lit, and I also had my makeup mirror plugged in above my washing machine. I had it turned on, so it had a little bit of light. But it was basically me just sitting alone in the dark. And so my husband asked me what's wrong, and I was telling him what I was feeling, and talking to him about all this stuff. And he thankfully was, such a supportive person, and he was such a pillar of strength for me. And he kind of, lit up my vast void and kind of brought me back from its depths. And he started telling me we're gonna be okay, we're gonna get through this, it's just, we're at a low point, you're not a failure, you're not any of the things that your depression or anxiety want to tell you, because you're a very capable person and you can do anything you set your mind to. So this is just a roadblock. This is just a low point. This is not something that's going to be the end of the world. And So, you know, he was able to pull me back from my depression. And luckily, I have a lot of great people that are in my corner and that I could turn to in, those times of struggle. And I'm very thankful that I have them. And I'm glad I was able to talk to my dad. And even my dad was like, because he knows how my depression gets to me. And he knows that sometimes I just have to talk to somebody. So he goes, if you need to talk to me, you call me. He goes, I don't care what time it is. And he goes, if you call, I'll answer. And I remember when I was living with him, and I think it was before I started going to therapy, my head was just getting too loud, and all my thoughts were getting really too loud. So I remember going up to his room at like 3 o'clock in the morning and waking him up, and me and him would just sit on his bed and we would just talk about my problems. And he never turned me away. He was always there to listen. He was always there to give me advice when I asked for it. He was such a great dad, and he still is a great dad. And I'm very thankful that I had him growing up, because I feel like if I didn't have him, that house was chaos majority of the time. And a lot of people were at each other's throats most of the time. He was fighting with his ex-wife and his son. I was fighting with his ex-wife and his son. They were fighting each other. But luckily, me and my dad never really butted heads. We never really had any arguments. We never really had any issues. And we were always just like a solid front to one another, or for one another. So I'm very glad I have the relationship that I do with my dad, and I'm glad that even, states away, he's still in my corner and behind me and always supporting me and always wanting the best for me. And no matter what, if I need him, my dad will always be there for me. And I think that's such a great thing. And I'm very thankful and I'm very lucky that I have him as a dad, because I know a lot of people don't have those same feelings and they don't have that same relationship. I'm glad that's the one relationship out of that house that has stood the test of time, and I can always depend on, and I know that if I need him, he'll be there for me. And same with my husband. If I need him, he'll always be there for me. And he's always in my corner. He's always there to support me. He's always someone I can talk to, and someone I can confide my deepest, darkest worries and fears, and, crying fits at 3 o'clock in the morning because my emotions are getting the best of me and I just need somebody to talk to about it. He's always there to be what I need him to be. So I'm glad that I was able to have the people that I do in my corner to kind of help me not get sucked in to my depression, as much as my depression wanted me to. And I know that today, recording this, was a good day, but tomorrow is a different story. And it just, something my dad always tells me is whenever I'm dealing with something or I'm struggling with something, he always likes to remind me the sun will always come up tomorrow. And I was talking to him today because he's like, I'm going to be checking on you a lot more. And I go, okay. And so he called to check on me, and he goes, yep, what do I always say? The sun's going to come up tomorrow. And I said, yep, it came up today and it's going to come up tomorrow. He goes, exactly. And something else, I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I'll say it again because it's still such solid advice. He always tells me that when you're at rock bottom, the only place you can go is up. So it may be a low point that I'm in, and it may be a low point that my husband is in, but I have faith that me and him are gonna get through this. We're gonna be able to put all this behind us. It's just, a tough situation, tough spot to be in, but as long as we have each other and we can depend on each other and we can lean on each other, we're gonna be okay. So if you were struggling this month like me, just put one foot in front of the other Just take it one day at a time. You don't need to have all the answers. I know all the question marks are very, very overwhelming and you just want to fix everything. But if you're struggling, just know I'm also struggling. So you're not alone in that aspect. If I could take it one day at a time, you can also take it one day at a time. And the sun will always come up tomorrow. So before I end this episode, I do want to talk about an idea that I had for like, I guess a segment for the podcast. If anybody has any questions they want to ask me, or they want my take on a situation that they're dealing with, or they want help with like some like wording something that they want to tell somebody, because I know people struggle with words a lot, and I would like to think I'm pretty good at being able to get a point across and not have it come out wrong. But I am only human. I do have a tendency to put my foot in my mouth sometimes. But if you want my help with how to phrase something, or you want my take on a situation that you're in or you're dealing with, or you want to ask me a question, you can DM me on social media, Instagram and Twitter, or X. I'm always going to call it Twitter because it's just Twitter. Both Bitch Bet Podcast with an I. They're in the show notes below as well. You can also text me anything. Those are still in a link down in the show notes below. And yeah, so if you want to message me, I can read those out or answer them at the end of next episode. So I think that'll be a good thing that we can do. If you enjoyed this podcast, give me a follow. Follow the podcast. You can follow me on social media to know what's going on. I need to get better at that. Maybe with this break, I can focus on my social media presence. Who knows? It's also something I've been struggling with, but I have all the time in the world, apparently, to get better at it. So maybe that's something to keep me occupied, because unemployment life is boring. I don't know how some people can do this all the time, but that's none of my business. But I don't think it works for me very well. But rank this episode 5 stars, rate the podcast 5 stars. If you liked any of the past episodes, let me know. Yeah, I think that's all I have for you this month. As always, to all the negative voices in your head, bitch bet. That's something I could have told myself the other day, but here we are. I've never been good at taking my own advice, so maybe you can take my advice for me. I hope you guys have a good rest of your month, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Thanks so much for listening. Until we talk again next time.